A lot of us are wondering, what does this mean, this college readiness thing? And Michael Gaines, this is the first time I've met him. We've been on email together. He's from Sinclair Community College. And Michael, I know you're going to do a much better job of introducing yourself and what you do than I will. But you oversee the college readiness centers for Sinclair Community College. And so you can really enlighten us here. And he's also brought several handouts, but we have plenty of copies, we know that. And they're related to the Board of Regents. Some of you probably have used the Board of Regents, the Readiness for Reading and Writing, '07 published. It's been online. We also have an article that he shared with us in advance, and then Carol Dodson also made a copy of a portion out of the new Common Core standards that might be related to what we're talking about here today. So we have more and we have plenty. So Michael?
Great.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Michael Gaines. I have a new hat, so I have to get used to that title. I recently have been given the responsibilities of the interim senior director for school linkages, as well as maintaining the other responsibilities that I had as a coordinator for the Office of College Readiness Centers. And in general, what we do, we work with high schools, and our program stands kind of like at that intersection where we have our hand held out to those students coming from the high school arena, and our hand held out to our fellow folks on the higher education side. And our job is to stand there and create bridges and try to help improve communication and try to help identify ways in which we can make the transition from high school to college easier for the students, as well as I think we're in a beneficial place where we have our feet planted in both worlds, both secondary and post-secondary, and so we have like a schizophrenic mindset in that we understand that there is a whole system of issues and a whole system of requirements that secondary have that is different than the whole system of issues and things that post-secondary have. And yet there's this gap where sometimes there's a lack of communication and a lack of understanding, and I think sometimes a lack of professional courtesy across that bridge that I think impedes our ability to help create that seamless system for the students. Because I think as professionals, both on the higher ed side as well as on the secondary side, I think one thing that we all have in common is that we're focused on student learning. And that's really our main bread and butter, student learning. And I think when we get past some of the friction that exists there, and we'll talk about that in some degree, I think, today, we find that we're all after the same goal. And that is a student who is capable not only to stand on their own, but capable to walk confidently into their future. And so that's our goal in our College and Career Resource Centers. What we're trying to do is help students for whatever reason. They may have gaps in their learning, and many of them have gaps in their knowledge about the college going process. And so we step in the system in those processes and help them gain that confidence as they're moving forward. What I'd like to do today, in respecting our time, I thought, okay, what are some of the topics that we possibly could discuss? Looking at exploring current understanding of college readiness, identifying the national and state context of remedial education, explore OER, college readiness, and identify practical steps to engage in post-secondary institutions and college-ready dialogues. And I'll say this to you, by profession and training, I am an adult educator. That's my training. And adult and community education is my baby. And so I say that because I have typically dealt with the individuals that have dropped out of school, the individuals that are trying to figure out, I have a life, I have kids, I have things that I need, I have dreams, I have aspirations. What's out there to help me re-engage in my learning process so that I can achieve the goals that I have for myself in the immediacy, as well as for my children and my grandchildren. Because everyone has dreams, regardless of what their choices happen to be. Everyone has a particular future goal or a particular future dream. So that's been my baby over the years, and I've transitioned to higher education and find that many of the issues that we address in the adult education world are issues that our students are dealing with. In our high schools, because and I often say this, many of our high school students are dealing with adult issues, but yet are confined by high school adolescent structures. And so there's a disconnect with them because in their life away from school, they're dealing with a lot of hard issues, but when they come into the educational setting, they're confined to this box of how they have to deal with things. And for some of them, it's too much and they drop out and they have these disconnects, they underperform, they act out, all these other issues because there are things that they're dealing with. So for me and my staff, our goal is to partner with our high schools, come in and create creative ways of resource centers in the school, both for students to get credit for high school as well as just to supplement that high school going process, the college going process for our students, and try to figure out, again, what can we do to help our students succeed. And because that's my mindset as an adult educator, one of the very basic principles of adult education is you assume, and the assumption is, that every individual that walks into your classroom comes with a base of knowledge by which they use to govern themselves. And that base of knowledge is a rich place in order to launch off of your learning experiences with them. So you typically think that whatever we're teaching, we create a synergy around this and use the individual's own personal experiences as the place to begin the learning process. And that's generally what I encourage my staff, who are primarily elementary, high school educators, to think along a more adult education concept as we move forward. Having said that, I typically don't stand up here and say I know everything, because there are a lot of things I do not know, and I don't make that assumption. And I typically make the assumption that everyone in the room are professionals, and that we all bring to the conversation experiences that can help each of us better understand this whole concept of college readiness. One, we've all gone through college, so we have our own personal experience. We also have seen either children or others around us transition to the college level, and in some instances we have seen that it's different than what it was when we went through that process. There are different challenges and different issues, and then we see that there are some things that are the same. And I make that statement simply so that as we move through the next few minutes that we have, we can dialogue around this. My goal is to present information on a national context, a state context, and then to take a look at what are some of the practical things we may be able to do on a local level, so that we can begin to positively impact this college readiness idea. And I'll say this, as many individuals as there are in this room, that's how many ideas we have about what college ready is. And the conversation both on the post-secondary and the secondary side of the house is that we need to figure out what it means to be college ready. And one of the key elements to this is in the community college setting. There are two primary things that we typically do in the community college world. One, we prepare individuals to go into the workplace. And then secondly, we prepare individuals to successfully transition to the 4-year experience. And those are our two primary objectives. And for some, they think that community college is a 13th year. But many students are completely shocked when they come to the community college level because of bias and stereotypes about the community college, and they fail to realize community college is your first 2 years of college. And so you have comparable challenges in the community college on the college level as you do when you go to any 4-year college. And so some of the access and transition and persistence issues that we have in the 4-year institutions, we see them in greater numbers here in the community college level. So just to set a context for you there. So question, when we think about this concept of college readiness, what comes to our minds? What are we thinking about? What are you thinking about as you are approaching this idea and formulating your concept of college readiness? Ideas. What are you thinking about? What is college ready?
Scoring high on the AccuPlacer.
Scoring high on the AccuPlacer. Very good. Scoring high. Now, how many of you all know what the AccuPlacer is? How many of you know what Compass is as it relates to, okay, Compass? Now, let me help you. AccuPlacer and Compass are placement tests. And basically, they're simply tests that say, do you know your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, yes or no? Based upon how you perform on this particular test that tests your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, you are then placed into a class. Either it is a college level class, or in the world of higher education, we call it developmental education, we call it remedial education, and we'll get into a little bit of that in a moment. And that placement determines a couple of things. One, it determines how long they will be in college. It determines how much it will cost them through their college experience. And even a greater concern it determines if they will even complete their college education. And we'll talk about that remedial piece because it's so big. And when I talk to the high school students, because I get to go out and hang out with the high school students as well. And so when I'm talking to them, when I'm in the high schools, I share my life story with them and some of the challenges that I've had, and I focus on choice and consequences with our students. But I ask them simple questions. Why are you in high school? What is the point of your high school education? And for many of them, they can't make the connection between why they are in high school and after graduation, you know, and so that's a challenge in and of itself, because if they cannot make a connection between their purpose of getting up every morning, going to their school, and why I need algebra, why I need this, why I need a language, and all of these things, it becomes very difficult for us to even have a real conversation with them about college readiness, to be college ready, because the things that we're asking them to do, we know we're trying to prepare them to a goal, but to them, they're not catching that, and so it makes it somewhat challenging for us as we move forward. The AccuPlace, or any other ideas of college readiness? Yes, ma'am.
Being able to independently navigate the system.
Okay.
Or whether it is coursework or where you go to get what.
Independently navigating the systems, whatever they happen to be, once mom and dad and whoever, Aunt JoJo's not there with you anymore and you got to figure this out on your own, navigating those systems, very good. Other ideas along with college readiness? Yes.
Well, there's obviously an assumption of some academic preparedness, but I think for a lot of students, it's more emotional.
Mm-hmm. Assumptions about.
Actually ready, and you even said the word persistence earlier, and that's something that we see a lack of in a lot of the students where I work,
Mm-hmm.
and end up coming home from college because of that.
And it's, you know, there's whole bodies of research out there related to access, related to persistence, related to the importance of students being prepared coming in, but it's not just being prepared coming in. There's a whole list of other skills that students need to have emotionally, need to understand how to navigate systems, need to have a sense of who they are in the midst of all of this. That, how do you do that in a textbook? You know, and so there's a whole nother level of this college readiness piece that begs me to ask the question, and I've been known as a rebel rouser, so I'll continue the tradition. It begs me to ask the question, as educators, what are some of the things that we need to challenge ourselves on, and how we think about our responsibilities in teaching the content that we're teaching? I think I heard a comment, and I see this all the time. You know, you have the academic side of the house, the core, and then you have the more technical side, and then there's this idea, well, that's not my responsibility because they need to handle that on the other side, and that's not. And what we're finding is, when we look at these college readiness pieces, a lot of the standards that we have, particularly in the community college world, because we are also very, very highly motivated by business and industry, our college readiness standards really are those standards that businesses need their employees to have in order for those employees to be profitable in the business. So when we talk about college readiness, we're talking about both college and career readiness, so that that student can both work in the careers as well as move on to higher levels of education. Any other thoughts around this college ready piece? What I want to do is I want to give a national perspective, because I think, like, when I talk to our students in our high schools, I like to terrify them. I try as much as I possibly can to tell them, wake up. There is a lot happening after high school. Once you walk across that stage, there's something magical that happens. You're no longer a child. You're an adult, and the expectations change because you get a piece of paper in your hand. What are you going to do once you have that paper? And we try to have those conversations with the students so they can understand there's more to this than just my little world. And so when we talk about college readiness on the local level, we're really talking about a national conversation. And we know that because we got the core standards, and we know that the core standards are national, and then they move down to state, and then they move down to the local area, and then we make those decisions within our own buildings. So it's the same way with this whole concept of college ready. And I'll focus on remedial education because, in essence, and I tell students this, if you're placed into a remedial education class, basically you're paying for high school all over again. And so you're asking, you got to come out of your pocket At Sinclair, you know, since that's where I work and we have a levy, they're paying $48 and something a credit hour if they're a Montgomery County resident, $78 or something like that if they're not a Montgomery County resident. But wherever you go, 2-year or 4-year institutions, there are remedial classes that you have to take before you can get college level. And that's why we have placement tests at every college that you go to in some form or another. And so we'll have this conversation about the remedial education because it's so important. The national data from the U.S. Department of Education on participation in remedial education found that 34% of all new entering college students require at least one remedial education class. And on the community college level, it's 43% that need at least one remedial class. Some states have upwards to 30, 40, and even 50% of their graduating seniors who need to take at least one remedial education class. And let me know if I'm flipping too fast if you want me to hold up. Now, what's the impact? I consider myself a social entrepreneur, although I'm an educator. Everything that I do has a social element to it with the intent of what's the bottom line to this thing? What's the business impact? Because that's where really people pay attention. When it starts impacting your pocket, you start saying, let me do something different about this. So what's the impact? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has estimated that it costs states and students upwards to $2.3 billion annually to address this particular issue of remediation, which is huge. And I'll share in a moment why that's so important to us in the community college world. And this is the other piece, college completion rates. There are a number of students who come in but never make it to the back end of this whole education process. Where are they? How does that impact us as a society? What are the challenges that we're dealing with because individuals are coming in and are not capable of completing? And I'll make sure that this is available and you can post it on your blog and your website and things like that as well. For new entering community college students, 15% of students placed into remedial education, and this is Achieving the Dream initiative that's focusing in on what can we do to help reduce the number of DEV classes that students take or speed the process up so they get through them quicker and it doesn't impact them dropping out of college as frequently and in higher numbers. And this is the thing, 50% of students placed into a remedial education completed their remedial education sequence in one academic year. 40% partially completed, 46% did not begin the sequence at all. And what that means is this, let me translate that for you. Your high school students who are graduating, who need DEV classes, come to the high school, the post-secondary level, some of them get to the door and say, I'm just not ready for this. 46% turn away and don't come back. The other percentages say, okay, I can do this, and understand what happens after high school. After high school, when you're entering into college and you start quote unquote living, and you have to worry about things such as car, rent, transportation, food, and you're no longer, under doing that yourself. Those are real issues that impact the community college students even more so than the traditional 4-year students. So there are other pressures for the community college students that's causing them at times to drop out in higher numbers and at higher rates. 61% of community colleges take at least one remedial course. 25 take 2 or more. And why is that so important? Because the data shows us that students who take 2 or more developmental education classes are more likely to drop out of college altogether. And so it's not just a matter of the students not having the content and skill set, it's a matter that it's such a steep hill for them to climb. And many of them, we're educators. We understand the importance of education, but we also have lives. We're professionals, but we have lives added to that, and we do other things away from that, and our emphasis is to help others learn. However, our students are the same. They have lives apart from their roles as students, and those responsibilities as students impact their responsibilities away from being students, impacts their ability to be greater or more effective students. Just like, you know, we have the stressors of life that kind of beat down on us, they have the same stressors of life. The state perspective. Many college freshmen in Ohio have not taken high school courses that prepare them for college. 70% of first-time freshmen in Ohio in the fall of 2003 have completed at least a minimum college preparatory curriculum in high school, only 70%. And this is very interesting. 24% took a more rigorous curriculum. And the last point, many students don't take the full array of college of courses that are important for success in college. 41% of Ohio's recent high school graduates enrolled at Ohio Public College and University in the fall. At least one took a remedial course in English or math during their first year of college. And you know, remedial education isn't a death sentence. It's, you know, and as I tell our students, you make choices, whether intentional or unintentional. All that means is that it may take you longer to achieve your goal, but you still can achieve it. You just got to have a different plan to work with. But these are some of the challenges that we have. In 2003, the remedial course enrollment rate for students taking a complete college preparatory course was 15%. That means 15% of the students who took college prep level courses still entered into remediation. 35% of students taking the minimum core had a remedial course, and 53% for students taking less than a college preparatory curriculum. Now I tie this all back. We see these numbers. I tie it all back and say $2.3 billion. You know, that's the impact that we're seeing. And it's not just about whether they graduate, don't graduate, prepared or not prepared. There's an economical piece that's tied to this that for me is a motivational factor as we're moving forward with this. Even students taking the minimum college preparatory curriculum are not necessarily prepared to be successful in college. In most recent high school graduates, 70% only take the minimum core, repeating that piece that we saw before. Thoughts? Whose fault is this? You know, that's what we always do. Everybody wants to know whose fault is it anyway. You did that, I did that, your fault, my fault. You know, we do this pointing fingers game. And I like to think about it, and this is a question I ask. Whose responsibility is it to educate a child? It's a question, and I have this conversation with my daughters every once in a while. They're freshmen and sophomore. Whose responsibility is it to educate a child? And, you know, we throw out, well, it's the parents, and it's this, and it's the educators, and it's this, and it's this. My view is simple. It is 100% the responsibility of the child to learn. It is 100% the responsibility of the educator to teach. It is 100% the responsibility of the parent to support the educational process so that learning can take place and so that educators aren't trying to parent in the classroom and deal with a myriad of other issues. It's 100% the responsibility of the administration to support the educational pieces that are happening in the classroom. It's 100% the responsibility of the community to support the educational process that's happening. Now that's my view, and I'm a rabble-rouser and an idealist, and I understand that I am that. You know, I don't live in pie in the sky. I understand we live in real terms, but it helps me when I think of it that way to recognize that I have a responsibility in this whole piece. And I need to determine, as an educator, as an administrator, as a taxpayer, or whatever my role happens to be as a parent, I need to understand what is my responsibility to help move this process along. And whose fault is it anyway? It's not about fault, it's about change. Because the reality is this: if we do not change the things that we're doing and what's happening, and we're trying to figure out, and I'm not saying this to say no one's doing anything and everyone's twiddling their thumbs and saying I'm gonna wait till I retire, I'm gonna wait till the next person comes and handles this problem. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that as educators, we see the need, because we're in the trenches every day. I was talking to someone yesterday in a conversation, and she said something very interesting to me when she was talking about the difference between the conversation between higher ed faculty and the conversation between the teachers in high school. And she said, you know, a teacher in high school has in their classroom and individuals from the range of those that may go to prison to those that may be the next president of whatever. And their responsibility is to teach all of them. By the time many of those students make it to the college level, there's been a weeding out process. And so there's a disconnect sometimes with the higher ed faculty to understand the complexity of the issues that high school educators have in the high school setting, because they don't see all the same students. So it just, why can't you teach them ABCs and 1, 2, 3s by the time they get to us? And so there's a disconnect that happens. And that's important. Yes, ma'am.
I span both of those too, because I teach at the high school, but I also teach at our community college. And I think there's another disconnect. The community college teachers don't know what we do. We spend a lot of time getting ready. They have no clue, well, at least those at the college I work at. And they don't think that you assign literary analyses or that you assign research papers. And many of them think that, you know, at the freshman level at the college that this is all being introduced. And sometimes I get really frustrated that they don't know that we have worked on all of those skills in high school. So there's a disconnect that way as well, if that makes sense.
Perfect sense. Any other thoughts around that? Because that, I mean, Sue, I couldn't have done it better. It was a great lead in.
And we have to go back to Olivia from
That's
meeting.
fine.
So on that note,
Oh,
okay.
safe trip. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know how, if I can make this sense of this very quickly, but my own son is one of these kids.
Mhm.
And there's nothing more embarrassing than an educator saying, guess what, my son had to come home from college. He did not take remedial classes. In fact, he was well prepared. He went to a good school and was well prepared. Emotionally, he had family that supported him, and education was prepared. What he found was college seemed like more of high school. And it was not 21st century, and it was not meeting his intellectual needs. And guess what? He likes community college better.
Yay for community college.
I'm serious. He says he feels like he's being treated as though he is a functioning adult now.
You know, and I think...
So kudos to community college, first of all. Thank you for what you do.
I think one of the probably one of the major reasons is that the average you know community college student is like 24. At Sinclair, it's like the average community college student at Sinclair is, I believe, it's like a 24 or 25-year-old white female with a child. I mean, that's the average, you know, community college there. I believe it's 24. And the reason why I say that is this: community college is designed. When you have individuals in the class that are like 80, on down to someone that's doing PSEO that's like 16 or 17, you know, and so that traditional 18 to 21-year-old college experience isn't there, and so you have a blend of experiences that are in the classroom that make it less professor-centered, I think, at times, and more
He feels very,
student-centered at
that's
times.
exactly what he said. I said, what's the difference? And he said, I feel like the teachers he goes to Columbus State are there for their students.
You know, and I think that is something that even in the secondary side, we know that we have professionals and we have our peers. And some classrooms you want to walk by and just hold your head down and say you're an embarrassment to me as a teacher. I can say that because I'm not in there. You're an embarrassment to me as a teacher. And then you have other classrooms where you're like, this is what it takes in order to help make that transition. And unfortunately, I think that we're going to have that disconnect for a period of time because, you know, as a professional, that's an internal decision to be proficient in what you do. And you really can't externally motivate that, although you can modify behavior through sanctions and other things like that. But you really can't motivate whether somebody wants to be a true professional in what they do or not. And so that's kind of like one of the challenges that we have. But Sue made a good point in her transition. The college readiness expectations, and I have information up here and you can get that from off the website as well. And I assumed that you were making the connections from the national course standards and the state course standards from OER. The college readiness expectations define what students need to know and be able to do before they begin their first non-remedial college level course in English and mathematics courses, while still students have time to address potential deficiencies while in high school. And this is information you can get off of the net, and I don't want to focus on that. Some of the, because I want to get to the last part of this. You know, when we talk about what is it going to take for us to create a college readiness mindset? And I think Sue did a great job bridging that conversation, is that if we're going to figure out what college readiness really means, we have to start talking about it. I mean, we really have to start talking about it, because we can have the standards, and the standards are like a map. They tell you this is a good idea of a direction that you need to go in order to reach this destination that we've called college readiness. But it by no means tells you, okay, I'm going down 71 today, and on 315 they have exits that are closed, so I'm going to have to go around 315 today and, hit 70 and then make that loop, or I may just need to go down to 270 and do it, make that loop around there. It doesn't tell you what's actually happening on the ground in the trenches. And what's happening is that there's a need to begin to focus on having the conversation around, okay, I'm doing X, Y, Z in my classroom. What is the equivalent of that on the other side of the fence in the post-secondary world? Because if you think about it, if students are to be college ready, that means that as post-secondary education, we're handing them off to someone else. And that someone else has an expectation of what that student should be able to do when they reach them. Which means that if I'm assuming, on one hand, that this is what you want me to have my student to know, even as I'm following the standards, and we know that sometimes the standards say the same words, but mean totally different things. And so the real element is having that conversation to determine, what are we really meaning? Are we really saying the same thing as we have this conversation? So determine to focus on student learning. Some of the practical steps. Student learning is the outcome. I mean, that's really what we're about, student learning. And what does student learning look like? As professionals, we have the responsibility to have that conversation. What does student learning look to you as a professor? What does it look like to me as a secondary instructor? And what does it look like at that gray area where we're passing the baton of the student off from one person to the next? Develop standard-based curricular pathways. And what I mean by that is, these students are going along a pathway to learn a certain amount of content that leads them to somewhere in particular. And so it's a matter of starting not just at graduation and working back. It's a matter of starting at when we hand them off and work backwards, so that we make sure that we're lining that up to the place where we're handing them off, and having serious dialogue about that. Engage post-secondary partners in dialogue around standards. And Sue said it well. A lot of post-secondary instructors, and understand this, many of them have not gone through official training on how to teach. And there's a large movement within the post-secondary area where we have centers of teaching and learning, where training is being done for our faculty as to what are teaching methodologies that are age appropriate, what are teaching methodologies that allow students to be able to move up Bloom's taxonomy, and just not just being able to regurgitate knowledge, but being able to synthesize and evaluate the knowledge. So this type of training and learning is happening for many of the instructors who are in the higher ed area, because many come through the professional ranks and end up in the classroom, although there are many that come through secondary ed and end up there. So there's a disconnect with that, which gives the opportunity for many of our secondary counterparts to help inform our post-secondary counterparts on methodologies and pedagogy on how to actually teach content in a way that assists in the learning process. So there's rich opportunity for that. About creating common definitions and terms related to instruction, and engage post-secondary partners in dialogue around specific teaching skills, curricular content, and a level of learning. I suppose my emphasis in this world of college readiness is in the world of secondary and in the world of post-secondary. There is still the conversation on the post-secondary side of what is college readiness. Because sometimes the expectation of what a student should know when they get to us is far higher than what it should be. Because there's, how do you define what that student should know when they reach you? And so some of that conversation needs to happen, because when on a local level, if you have, how many of you have community colleges close to where you are? How many of you are currently engaged with the community college faculty around the conversation of what are the English teachers teaching on the community college level and what's being taught in the high school? Okay? These types of conversations are so crucial because what begins to happen is when you begin to have these conversations, the high school faculty, let me digress for a moment, because this professional etiquette kind of thing. How frustrating is it? Do you think it would be to be sitting in a room as a high school instructor, having gone through 1 or 2 masters, you have your doctorate degree, or you have your master's, you've taught for 15 to 20 years, and then you go into a room with a post-secondary educator who has been teaching for 3 years but has a doctorate degree, and all of a sudden, the 3 years and the doctorate degree makes this particular post-secondary instructor more informed about what you do in your classroom. And that's not an uncommon kind of experience, which is why it's very important that the dialogue begin to take place around content. What is actually being taught in the classes? Because when we start having that conversation about content, it begins to focus on, okay, what we're all professionals, the content that we're professionals around. And so it moves it from big I's and little U's, and it starts focusing it back in on the most important factor of all of this, which is student learning. And I keep going back to student learning because that's the core of everything that we do. And so I say one of the most practical steps, if you have community colleges around you, begin to make that initial contact and say, let's get together and let's dialogue around this whole thing of college readiness and what it means. And let's take a look at how many of you all have pacing guides and various forms like that tells you what you need to do from freshman all the way to senior. Those things can be beautiful because, again, post-secondary has no clue what you're teaching and the amount that you're teaching and the year that you have the students and what needs to be covered. So those are great conversational starters. And so, and some of the practical pieces as we talk about the college readiness piece, beginning those dialogues with post-secondary institutions, whether 2-year or 4-year, depending on where you are. Begin those dialogues because that's really what's going to help you define what college readiness is. Because you're going to have the standards, and like I said, they're a map. But it's totally different when you begin to have those conversations with your peers, across the aisle in post-secondary world. Questions, comments? I do have a few handouts up here, and make sure that you get that. The one handout that from the community college side, and I think we sent the website for this as well. This gives a fairly good understanding of, through the lens of a community college, the impact of the remediation conversation. And I think it would be very helpful to have a dialogue around this within your world of secondary education as well. And then the other pieces that we have are the cores from both OER as well as from the National Core Standards website. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Very good stuff. And so you'll also get me the PowerPoint, your PowerPoint. There's a lot of really good stuff on there.
Yes.
As I sat there and I was listening to it, I was writing notes down too because you're inspiring my thinking. I was just talking to Cindy too, by the way, about our January 21st meeting. She also has a lot of ideas for how we might frame that discussion on that day. And so she had to take off. But I was thinking about like the 21st century, this focus on 21st century skills and how this is really should be a focus of that when we're talking about how are we preparing for kids for life beyond post high school and stuff type of thing. And so this is really good stuff for us to think about. So thank you for coming today. And giving us a lot of good stuff. Anybody want to add anything to some of what Michael's doing or has shared today?
I just wanted to ask him about conversations with his own daughters when you talked about the 100% expectation of learning on the part of the student. I think that that's one of the challenges we face with high school students, is that we have different from 0 to 100% responsibility acceptance for that. And I think that that's a difficult reality with which to work.
You know, when I go out to our labs and I talk to our students, the thing that I emphasize with the students, and I think they think I'm crazy sometimes, because I tell them very frankly, I have mine.
Yeah.
I have worked hard for what I have. And I let them, and I challenge them. I ask them the question, how many of you want to have the same lifestyle that your parents currently have? How many of you see your parents waking up every morning, jumping up and down and saying, yes, I get to go to my job? And how many of you all want that same type of experience for yourself? And then when they begin to think about that, we then make the connection. What you're doing in high school will determine if you'll wake up every morning to the same type of job that your parent has, or if you'll make different choices and have different consequences to experience different things in life. And when they begin, because students, we know, students are so self-centered in many instances, and it's not until you can help them see how what they're doing really impacts them. And for most of them, when they realize, oh my God, if I don't do something different, then I'm gonna have to, I don't like what my parents do. That's and then we try to help them make a connection to their own future. And I think the more that we lovingly encourage the students to think through their processes in those areas, because a lot of it is just showing the care for the students, that we care what happens to you. You can choose what you want to do because you're an individual, but there are consequences for that. And as we share that with them, many of them begin to make that connection. And not all of them. Some of them are going to knock their head against the wall and be bloodied up until they're 25 and 30 years of age, and then all of a sudden they wake up and say, oh, I want something different. And then they realize, wow, everyone's like hundreds of miles down the road, and then they have to deal with that set. And so I think in having a conversation with high school and with my daughters, I absolve myself of the responsibility of being responsible for their lives. I'm not responsible for their lives. I'm responsible to make sure they know what they need to know in order to succeed and to support them as they're going through. But my kids can turn around and become axe murderers for all I know between now and the time that they become adults and do whatever they need to do. But that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to make sure that they have the support and they have the knowledge and the access to the information to succeed, and that we teach them how to think through to be able to utilize that. And that's kind of the same kind of conversation I have with our high school students when I go out and talk to them and with our staff.
Yeah, but not every parent has your background.
True.
Yeah, I think your slide on the practical steps is a really powerful one about how do you begin this, especially as I know I've heard some of the people talk about how they're in charge of the 21st century plan, which I told is my newest one. But I'm thinking some of the questions that you've posed about, for example, whose responsibility is to educate a child, and just some of those things you had on that slide to me should be part of that kind of vision and who we engage. And I think there's also a real paradigm shift for our high school people to be thinking that what we've done always, and just because we're having them read a really, like a Henry Kissinger book like Diplomacy doesn't mean that they're college ready. And but just maybe blowing up what we mean by that.
Because they still may not know who Henry Kissinger is after reading the book.
That's
right.
Totally. So well, I'm really glad that you came, Michael, and you spent some time putting this together. I think it has a lot of good information for us on there. So thank you. And he has some good handouts up here too that you may not know about, or you might want to take them back. And Carol also ran some copies out of our core for the college readiness standard.
I'm
So
glad you, Tara.